Hi, I'm 𝐂𝐻𝐼𝐮𝐬𝐭𝐢� and welcome to Signature Sound. The objective of these lessons is to share valuable recording and mixing techniques with those who have recording systems at home and can benefit from taking a peek into a session at a process of recording and mixing a song from start to finish. We'll begin with a very basic setup and we'll gradually add more production value to the song. A good mix starts with good performances, good arrangements, and good recording. Playing guitar and singing at the same time. In the following lessons, we'll divide up the recording of Jackson's vocals and guitar to show you the difference in production techniques. Before we get started, we want to illustrate some issues that can occur if you don't track properly. We stress this because people tend to get caught up fixing rather than enhancing during the mixing process, or they just don't understand why their mixes lack that crisp and professional sound. Ideally, when we finish tracking, we want the stereo field to be occupied only by the guitar and vocal, so when we mix we have greater control. But during the recording process, certain unwanted sounds such as leakage or a poor noise floor, among other things, can clutter our mix. Each issue may be faint and may slip by if you're not careful.
Important factors we need to take into consideration when setting up mics to record a musician: the artist's recording preference, the microphones available to you, and the polar patterns or pickup patterns the mics provide you. Altogether, these three factors have a huge influence on the final sound of the mix. Your mix will sound best when the instruments you record are tracked properly. In order to do this, it's important to understand the difference between the types of microphones available to you and their pickup patterns. Condenser and ribbon mics, and the different polar patterns like omni, cardioid, hypercardioid, and figure 8. Let's start by discussing sound leakage.
There is a spontaneity and excitement whenever a musician performs live. This chemistry may sometimes diminish when recording parts separately or overdubbing. However, we end up gaining more control over each instrument, and this control allows us to eliminate sound leakage. Sound leakage is when an unintended sound or sounds can be heard in a microphone meant to be recording another sound. Although the vibe and intensity of a live take can sometimes outweigh problematic issues, it's more often than not an issue during mixing for two reasons. First, the leakage from sound B weakens sound A by stomping all over it and muddying up the tone. Second reason, any treatment you add to sound A will also be added to the leakage of sound B. Thus, this can delay, and compression. That means you would have to think of the vocal and guitar as one mix element, since what you do to one affects the other. This can limit your mix options and your ability to define a sound. Say, for example, we have a drum kit leaking into a piano mic. It would sound something like this. If we add EQ to the piano during mixdown, we're also adding that EQ to the drums. Here's an example of what that could sound like. If we add delay to the piano, we add that delay to the drums, like so. Live performances, group vocals, orchestras, and drums are the most prone to leakage issues. In these recording scenarios, we have to accept that leakage will happen and that our final mix will be limited. However, we can do our best to minimize leakage as much as possible. And in the next lesson, we'll record the guitar and vocal performance separately so that you can hear the difference between recording live and tracking things separately. There are essentially dynamic condenser, and ribbon. Dynamic mics are generally the cheapest mics you can buy. They're less sensitive to sound pressure levels, so they're more durable and great for loud instruments, also making them ideal for live sound. Regarding sound pressure level, or SPL, every sound made starts from a sound source, then travels through the air by moving air molecules back and forth, changing the air pressure around it. This variation in air pressure vibrates our eardrums, and our brain decodes it as sound. Quiet sounds and high frequencies move the air less, creating a lower sound pressure level. Loud sounds and low frequencies move the air more, creating a higher sound pressure level. So dynamic mics being less sensitive to sound pressure levels, or SPL, means that they pick up loud sounds and low frequencies best. Condenser microphones are the next class of mic, ranging from $100 to several thousands of dollars. While you can easily collect the top dynamic mics for just $100 to $500, the quality of condensers are reflected in their price. So a $200 condenser is going to give you a drastically different sound from a $1,300 condenser. These mics are much more sensitive to sound pressure levels, making them great for acoustic instruments with high frequency content and strings. When using a condenser, you'll need an outside power source. And while a few come with their own power supply, many more use what's called phantom power, the 48 volts button on your preamp. Note, this is the only mic that requires phantom power. When in doubt, start with no phantom power and see if the mic functions. If it's not working, then you're probably using a condenser. Diaphragm and large diaphragm. Small diaphragm condensers are sometimes referred to as pencil mics. They're long, cylindrical, and generally have one polar pattern option, cardioid or omni. They're also great on instruments with high frequency content like cymbals, acoustic guitars, and harps. Large diaphragm condensers typically have a figure 8 to hypercardioid, giving us a wealth of options. They're also great for recording almost anything. Every studio should have at least one. Lastly, ribbon mics have a great vintage sound and feel to them. Like condenser mics, they're sensitive to sound pressure levels, but they also round off the high end, giving a warm, full sound without getting too harsh or brittle. However, since they are so sensitive to sound pressure levels, a quick burst of wind can easily break the thin ribbon of aluminum. With all of that in mind, two large diaphragm condenser mics are going to work best for us today. We're using two AKG 414s, which we got on eBay for around $500 each. One will be focused on the guitar, and the other focused on the vocalist. They'll pick up the full dynamic response of the vocals and guitar while maintaining a good signal-to-noise ratio. Since we're using these two particular large diaphragm condensers, we have a choice in polar pattern for each mic. An omni pattern is omnidirectional. It picks up the same amount of sound around the entire mic. Cardioid is the most popular pattern. It picks up sound mostly from the front of the mic, and sometimes a small amount of sound from directly behind the mic. This is a great way to record an instrument without picking up too much of the room. We call that directional. Hypercardioid is a variant of cardioid which is more directional. Like cardioid, it primarily picks up sound from in front of the mic, but in a tighter and more focused pattern. This option is used less in the studio and more often for live sound. The final polar pattern is called bidirectional, or more commonly known as figure 8, because the mic picks up sound from both the front and back equally, while rejecting sound from the sides, creating the look of an 8. Our polar pattern choice depends on what we're recording and where we need to play. He performs on an acoustic guitar. So, we're looking for a setup that gives us the ability to record both the acoustic guitar and the vocal at the same time, while giving us the maximum amount of separation. The voice coming from above and the guitar coming from below, both sounds mixing together in our ears. Thus, we're looking for a polar pattern that when facing the vocal rejects. I've also placed a pop screen on the singer's mic. We use this to diffuse the quick bursts of wind from plosive sounds like P's and F's. These are only really necessary for vocals when recording in the studio.